we are back with the book club, the Palindrome Book Club, and here we're working hard to bring forth some of the most controversial and suppressed history, some of the information that's the most difficult to dig out, and we're here providing it here for you. So please join the Palindrome Book Club.
No, I was just going to talk about fights and that whole series of Total Onslaught.
Is that the one? Yeah, he does different ones. But
that one really got me hooked into going back to God. That whole series, I watched the whole thing. I was so on fire after watching it. But the one that I'm talking about is the UN and the New Age agenda.
Yeah, that's the one we're going through. I mean, I never really was motivated to become a Seventh-day Adventist, which, I mean, I'm with Adventing on the seventh day. I'm with it, but I'm just not I'm not really good at getting into a group situation.
Yeah, I think now's the time. We're supposed to come out of the world. I think we're supposed to come out of Babylon, and supposedly the church is Babylon, or this papal system.
Right.
I've done my church and I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, if you found a good church and and the teacher's good, then you're good. I mean, but a lot of these churches, they're teaching a form of churchianity, which is really Romanized, because they have all the
formation, right, and all that.
They have all the accoutrements of Rome. So they have even the way they're positioning, and they even start to break out the little cups of wine and little pieces of bread. So they're starting to do kind of like a rudimentary form of communion, which the Baptists and the Presbyterians, all they really don't have any idea. They just kind of go in, they sit down, they go along with whatever you give them. So they really don't know. But if there are a few good churches that are keeping things together, that are at least remembering the old truth there,
Yeah.
We call it the old Christians of the way. The ones who remember the original persecutions and the old history there. A lot of these new Christians, they paint Easter eggs and they have Christmas decorations, and then that's it. Beyond that, they're just totally blank. Which is really what the point of this whole thing is. We're trying to introduce these kind of complicated ideas because the people in the church pews don't really know anything about the occult, because that's what it is. It's occult. It's darkness. It's invisible.
It's evil. It's dark. It's successful. It really is.
And they don't really have any kind of clue about it, so they need information. I mean, we need information to proliferate. But as far as the Vril Society and the Thule Society and just kind of bringing that stuff into, which is completely obscure, and putting it into kind of a way for people to manage the information and understand what's happened there. But I think it's fascinating because in ancient German secret societies, even before the time of Hitler, they had these beliefs in higher beings and higher racial, which is really the key thing, is they believed in a higher racial structure, so they believed they were racially superior. So that isn't particularly interesting, other than the fact that it's at the heart of the globalist elite today. They haven't really changed their stripes.
I'm thinking the Hindu caste system that almost applies there.
That's weird because, it's
a form of racism, I guess you could say.
Right.
Yeah, you're born in this caste, and even though all the castes are needed, there's some untouchables on there.
Right. That's fascinating because Blavatsky is going back to the ancient Aryan Hindus and saying that they have these weird racial theories, and that's how we get into this kind of weird quasi-racialist state, because really, if people have a complexion, they have melanin in their skin, and let's say they have less melanin, and they're pale, they're white-skinned people, it doesn't mean they're all in the same race, right? So it really doesn't. You have all these different kinds of people throughout the world speaking different languages, different cultures.
I mean, you have look at the Basque culture. Basque, they are a very unique white culture. They have the green eyes, dark hair, light skin, red hair.
They're their own racial, cultural, ethnic monolithic thing, but they don't fit into this weird black and white racial paradigm. It has to be more. It's more nuanced than that. There has to be more complexity in the way that we understand different people and different cultures and different racial groups. So there's a lot of people who have dark skin in South America, pygmy tribes, like people who live way down in South America, but they're not African.
South Pacific.
Yeah, they're not African people. They're just people whose ancestors lived close to the equator, and so they developed a high amount of melanin in their skin over time. So I think that we're really deranged over race as a global mass consciousness and as a global culture.
Natural selection.
Yeah, like Darwin really pushed that to the forefront too. Hitler seized on Darwin's theories to say that some races were more evolved and were more highly spiritually attuned. And so, yeah, that's the kind of like milieu that we find Blavatsky in. And as we look at these documents that I want to read in to the show, we have like some of the articles I sent over. I'll add them in the show notes. But it goes into this deep discussion about individuals who got these letters from the Ascended Masters and who explained the origins of the 7 root races and how there were these massive racial wars that wiped out all of the different races and only a few survived. And it reminds me of Mormonism. Mormonism has the same weird thing about the American Indians, They have this weird way of playing out this spiritual war.
They're the missing tribe of Israel, or
yeah. They have
There's all these temples built all over the country. They just haven't been discovered yet.
Yeah, they're supposedly the lost tribe of Israel, and they made God angry, so their skin got darker, and those who were blessed, in fact, who had the goodly nature to God, their skin became fairer. I mean, it's in the Book of Mormon, so we've done episodes on it. You really can't get around it. It's part of their immutable doctrine that people who have dark skin are cursed by God. That's the Mormon faith, So that's why all these different occult societies have this strange kind of Anglophile, white superiority thing going on there. And I think that Hitler seized upon it, and he definitely was an acolyte, a theosophist, if you want. So we'll show all that information in the show notes there. I think Edward Bulwer-Lytton, he was the guy who wrote Vril and the Power of the Coming Race. That was it, Vril, the book. He was the one who wrote the novel. And of course, when I look at his family, he was an English lord. He was a Lord Bulwer-Lytton. And you can see if you look at his background.
But isn't it so obvious, though, that all of these, this certain genre or religion, they all come from a secret, the secret doctrine, the Book of Mormon, the plates and the seer stones and the beginning of it, all the testimonials. We saw stones and the seer stones, and we read the golden plates. And all
right.
It's all a secret. Right. And it's like, I just thought of this, but it's like Jesus says. He says when they talk about the coming of the Son of Man, that he's going to be in the upper rooms. People will say he's in the upper rooms. Don't believe them. People will say he's out in the desert. Don't believe them. Because when he comes,
everyone's going to see it.
Overwhelming. Everyone will know. It's not some secret form or ceremony that you have to participate in. It's known. It's there for everyone.
Right. No, you're totally right. It won't be a secret inner chamber. That's how they operate. They operate with these. It's always Gnosticism. It's always this secret knowledge that no one else has, that you have to be revealed to, you have to be initiated into it. And then, so obviously the gospel of Jesus Christ is, everyone in the whole world knows it. Everyone is totally aware of the great
right.
thing.
So that means that the leader of the Gnostic church can select who, because apparently when you die, one of their beliefs, forms of their religion says that you encounter all these beasts and different things that are going to try to trick you in the afterworld and suck you down into, Hades, and you have to know how to navigate your way through it. And what kind of God do you really want to go to that heaven?
Right.
That God makes you do all of that crap?
Well, I think that for many people, the idea that they have to engage in some kind of religious work is just like fundamental to their existence. I mean, think about people like in Islam. They're ingrained from childhood, and it's like life or death. Like if you fall away from it, they'll chop your head off. So it reminds me of all the systems of cult ideology in the past. Like we're talking about the Hashishans. And the old man and the man, how they had perfected a system of assassins. It was so perfect.
The assassins.
Yeah, the secret order of assassins, the Hashishans, and how they were so brainwashed that they would just kill themselves on order. Like there's a certain level of occult power that's they create multiplying systems and multiplying agents. And
yeah, when they get ready to go on their mission. There are some of them, maybe this is the elite ones. They take them to a garden in a castle somewhere, and there's all kinds of fruits in the gardens and beautiful women, and totally indulge their senses for like 2 weeks, and then they go on their suicide mission.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. And I think these are the kind of programs over time that have been successful, have been operational throughout time, and you can see that they're trying to build up these elite agencies, and you can see over time that that's exactly what they've done. And we're dedicated on this program of kind of exposing and bringing to light some of this backstory and some of the hidden, forbidden knowledge. It's verboten. We're not allowed to discuss. We're not allowed to bring it out, and that's exactly what we're doing on the show. And I think it's fascinating that no matter what I do, I always keep returning to these high like royals, these high nobility in England. You have Arthur Balfour, and now you have this individual who was a politician, ultimately too, Edward Bulwer-Lytton, and he's writing this book, The Vril, and how it really it enchants and it mystifies an entire generation of the elite, so that they actually form this Vril society, and it actually empowers through occult societies and through secret mystery societies to actually help Hitler get into power. And so we have to kind of explore that whole backstory there and this connection between Theosophy, between the Third Reich.
Has that story been exposed? I don't think the real story has been exposed about Hitler and his rise to power at all. They whitewash it.
Well,
even though they show all the horrible things he did, he was really dark. He was deep into that, and they were doing. They were constantly on amphetamines, which could cause psychosis and hallucinations, probably the bad kind.
And I was thinking about that.
He was terribly dark. I mean, in his whole group, how does a group of dark individuals come together like they did in the Nazi Party? I mean, just, you know what I'm saying? So cruel and inhuman. Because they think they are inhuman. They're the superhuman.
Right. I think it was a will to power. I think it was. I mean, if you look at Hitler himself, he was an Austrian, so he's from Vienna, and he has Franz von Papen help him become the chancellor, and he spends 9 years looking kind of normal, and then everything just completely goes crazy. So I think during that time they must have built that infrastructure of power, that power base there, and they had all these strange Germanic cult background, the pagan cults of the Germanic people. Yeah, the Teutonic Knights, all these kind of strange Germanic pride, which is really what it was. Because you got to remember, World War I, Germany got really hammered, and then there was the Versailles Treaty, or whatever treaty it was, that basically put them in the position where they weren't allowed to really have an army, they weren't really allowed to have an economy, they were just this kind of slave state. And so I think Hitler addressed the grievances of the people and their pride, and brought all that kind of back, all this Germanic history and Germanic proud, make Germany great again kind of thinking. He brought it back into style. So, but ultimately, like I said, it looks to me like it was the Counter-Reformation, and ultimately the plan was to not to make Germany great again, but to lead Germany over the cliff. So that's why it's kind of strange when they say he was a nationalist, because he didn't do anything to help Germany as a nation. He just left it in ruins, which seems to be the ultimate plan, behind their whole apparatus. And I guess they wanted to destroy, like we said, a lot of these occult ritualism and occult magic, it always has this anti-Semitic bent, and they're always trying to, it goes back to the Inquisition too. The Inquisition was always trying to find the Christ killers and the heretics and root them out, And,
it's always involved children. It always involves children and abuse of children. They suck their energy out somehow. There's adrenochrome. There's got to be some truth to some of that.
Well, if you look, even if you go into South America, the mummies are there where they used to like to go up on the high on these peaks, and during the first light of the summer solstice, the Aztecs or whoever, my history's not perfect on it, but they used to sacrifice children up there, and I don't know what the obsession is with that. Why it is the children need to be carted up the mountain and then you're murdered on the first light on the tips of the mountain. They would show.
Yeah.
That's really what we have to kind of root out over time, is that there is a great controversy, and there is an adversary that attempts to destroy humanity, and I think that's what we have to fight against. So thank you for listening here. We have to take a moment to do a message from our sponsor. We have a wonderful sponsor. We have Wendy's Boutique Limited. So Wendy's Boutique Limited is the wonderful sponsor. And so Wendy's Boutique was happy to sponsor our episode. So you have to go and you can find most wonderful fine gold and silver jewelry there. You can find the hottest trends and styles, women's apparel, fashion, brand name labels at wendyslimited.com. wendyslimited.com. And so this is one of the hottest new boutiques out there. You have to just go in there and just support us, support our cause, support our sponsor, and make sure that you find some really beautiful item, maybe some wonderful perfume for your loved one, for your wife or girlfriend. Get some attention. wendyslimited.com. wendyslimited.com, guys.
About to lose control, about to feel the heat. Don't have to take it slow, no, not breaking so deep. So what are we waiting
for? And so as we're moving forward through the material, we're just trying to keep up with all the different information. We have to kind of split hairs and make sure that we, take a good look at all the different information that that we're presenting here. So ultimately, the Vril Society was going to come into being for being named. The word Vril coming from a novel that was written in 1871 by Edward Bulwer-Lytton. And Edward Bulwer-Lytton is someone that has a relatively famous name in literature circles. So as we're going forward, we have to recognize that a lot of the facts surrounding the occult nature of this kind of idea of a transcendent super race is coming out of this age of Darwinian theory, and the idea of this process of slowly coming out of the sludge and starting out as worms and climbing through evolution to become men, from monkeys to men. So this kind of idea is taking hold. And you can see that this idea of a superior race or the white race being dominant over other lower species of men, this whole kind of concept in the 1850s and 1860s and in the 1870s. So 1871 is when Edward Bulwer-Lytton is going to publish this novel called Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. Right? So it kind of taxes into, like Mormonism, it taxes into this era of certain racial theories and certain racial supremacy idealism and ideology that's working its way through the human cultural event. So in as much as this is the period of the Civil War, and so the idea of men who have melanin in their skin, who have dark color, the idea that they should be enslaved as a classification for their racial heritage, as far as the idea that white men are free men and black men are other races and other cultures are ultimately inferior and should be subordinated. These are all the kind of ideas of conquest that have been coming through the 18th and 19th century. So that the British Empire is ultimately the one, with the Portuguese and the Spanish and others, are the ones who are running this slave empire around the world. They're the ones who are trafficking in slaves, who are collecting them, pressing people into slavery in sub-Saharan Africa and other places in the world, in India, or, people are in slave conditions. So this idea of there being a super race is something that's deeply embedded in the European occult ideology. So that's why we point out that the Ku Klux Klan and the Mormons and others, and even ultimately the point that we're getting to here is that Theosophy and the teachings of Lucis Trust and Helena Blavatsky have this same tenor of racial superiority. So in order to kind of break down this whole discussion, we're going to introduce this New York article. And it's called, it's kind of like a joking satire title here that says that the Nazis came from Middle Earth and possibly still live there. And it's kind of a joke, and it really talks about this idea of the Vril Society being deeply embedded in the culture of conspiracy theories, but we need to really break it down and find out where it came from and the original source of the information, rather than just kind of going off with the UFO, flat Earth people, and just feeding into the absurd echo chamber of nonsense. We have to kind of find out where these terms come from. So in this article, we're just going to read it real quick and break it down. This article was coming in 2013. In 1871, under an anonymous cover, the writer-politician Edward Bulwer-Lytton published the novella Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. Bulwer-Lytton is now most famous for coining the phrase, "The pen is mightier than the sword," and the opening line, "It was a dark and stormy night." So those are some of the things he's famous for. So back to the article here. But Vril, too, has had a long afterlife. A conflation of Verne-esque, hollow earth sci-fi, proto-occult theories, and Darwinism. It's narrated by an American who stumbles on an underground, this is the book, this is the whole Vril novel, an underground race descended from ancient Aryans that harnessed a source of infinite power called Vril. Its processors, the Vrilia, had transcended war and envy and even democracy to establish a classless utopia. So it goes on to say, the myth of the Vril was quickly co-opted by the same Victorian mystics who inspired it, then passed down into the hands of nativist German cults. One of those cults, the Thule Society, backed Hitler and the Nazis, which is a true fact. After the war, writers, both pro- and anti-Hitler, theorized that the Führer's impatience with occultists notwithstanding, something called the Vril Society had actually engineered his rise. So we're getting into the kind of speculation about this Vril Society and what it could have been to Adolf Hitler. So it goes on to say that there were two French authors who asserted that the Nazis had sought to build UFOs, etc., etc. And it goes on to kind of talk about some of the conjecture about Hitler fleeing to Antarctica. We might make a note here. It's kind of ridiculous because our thesis is that Hitler survived and he made his way to Argentina, which is a long way off from Antarctica, right? So, not to say that the Nazis didn't try to have a submarine base in Antarctica or whatever, but the truth is that the most likely outcome is that he made his way out of there and he survived for a long time in Argentina. So let's go back to the article. So it goes on to make the accusation that the Vril Society is incorporated into right-wing New World Order conspiracy theories. Okay, so we'll just dispense with that, because our objective here is really to get down to the mainline course of the facts here, and to just dispense with all this, the Church of Vrilology and all this kind of nonsense, but to point out that there was an occult basis for Hitler to have these theories that had to do with, it substantiated the Darwinistic thought that there was a superior race. So that's kind of really what we're trying to isolate here out of this information. And it sums up in the article more useful. There's other information that's useful here. And it goes on to say that there's no denying that that IBM and Volkswagen had ties to the Third Reich, or that German spies were absorbed into the Western intelligence agencies. So, that, as far as we're concerned, that's enough information for us. All the other exaggeration and the deep reading into and speculation into Hitler's belief system nowadays is really not that interesting for us. But what we're trying to really ground into our thesis here is the active support of this Thule Society, which backed Hitler and the Nazis, and this idea of nativist German cults who were being inspired with this idea of the Vril racial theory, or this idea that there was a transcended spiritual nature to the German people. And in this way, when you realize ultimately that Theosophy and Helena Blavatsky are in the background of this atmosphere that's generating so much occult thought, and that ultimately that the interference with Western intelligence agencies and the fact that Wall Street with IBM and other large corporations were assisting the Nazis are things that don't seem to be that profound in this article, since they have to try to poke fun at this idea of the Vril. I think ultimately the context of the Vril became a symbolic piece of fiction, just how we look at today at 1984 and other books that are trying to describe a future, a postmodern future, and trying to paint a dystopian technotronic tyranny in the idea of fiction. And so in the same sense here, Edward Bulwer-Lytton is seizing upon the crystallizing belief system that the British aristocracy and the nobility and the princely ruling class of royalty that had reigned over the people of the earth for so long, giving them a justification and having this sense of scientifically formulated Darwinist theory that seems to suggest that all these other tribes and peoples and colored people all around the world are somehow inferior. And so that's what this book of the Vril, the coming race, is really describing in a text of being a fiction and a novel. So that's why it's relevant now, even though these later people have kind of taken up the terminology of the book of Vril to suggest that there's like an alien reptilian race and UFO race or something like that. It just becomes an absurdity now. But when we look at 1984 and we compare it with what the events are that are happening today, we don't think that the archetypes and the analogies that are being described in 1984 are ridiculous. And in the same way, in the book Vril, The Coming Race, it seems to, in a fictional way, describe the rise in the sense of racial superiority and the move towards a utopian world order where other lesser races are ultimately to be subdued. So that's the kind of like thinking that's behind there, and that's why Hitler would seize upon it. And so that's why that article is useful for our purposes, even though it pokes fun at right-wing conspiracy theories or whatever it does. But the point is it establishes the Thule Society, the influence with the Third Reich and Hitler, and the idea of a coming superior race. And it kind of interjects itself into, because of the hyper-spiritual dynamics of the book, it kind of gives itself over to this idea that there is an ancestral race of beings, like an angelic race, a UFO, alien force coming from another planet that are the creators of humans. And so this is where all this kind of mythology is being developed over time. So you go back to 1871, and they're looking forward to, ultimately H.G. Wells will follow, and they'll go with the War of the Worlds, and this whole idea of alien races and root races, and it gets back to Theosophy. I think in order to just establish that, the connection there in the occult world with the powerhouse that ultimately is going to wind up becoming the United Nations, and the influence of the Lucifer publishing trust, and which becomes Lucis Trust. In order to kind of establish more of that backstory, we need to go here. We have this fascinating paper. It's the Ariosophic Demonic Seeds, the Theosophical Roots of the Nazi Race Theory. And so this is a thesis, a historical thesis. It's put forth by John L. Crow, and I'll add the link so you can download it yourself if you're interested in reading it. But let's give it a whirl here. I'll just read it into our show here. When examining the history of Nazi occultism, one quickly finds that the domain is a confusing muddle of influences, connections, and ideological transmissions. Within the morass, it is difficult to draw lines of direct connection, yet if one is persistent over time, certain names, organizations, and documents consistently emerge as influential on a wide spectrum of participants. One of these figures is Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, 1831 to 1891, or better known as Madame Blavatsky. Blavatsky was co-founder of the occult organization, the Theosophical Society, which was initially created in 1875 in New York City, but shortly after relocated its headquarters to India. In 1881, Blavatsky published her magnum opus, the 2-volume set, The Secret Doctrine. The Secret Doctrine, in that book, she outlines a new vision of humanity's evolution, one that places the Aryans at the top of a racial hierarchy. She claimed these revelations came from occult sources and would inform various German occult organizations, which in turn would later inform the racial theory of Nazism. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was a myriad of racial theories circulating throughout Europe, all of which had their antecedents in 19th century. A common link for these theories was an innate anti-Semitism that kept the Jewish race separate and denigrated. Within occult circles in Germany and Austria, theosophical theories of race and human evolution were intermingled with pan-Germanic nationalism and anti-Semitism and nostalgic appeals to Germanic heritage prior to Christianity. So, just to make a note, this is going a nostalgic appeal back to the pagan culture and the profane practices that had happened in the tribal era before Christianity. So let's go on. This potent cocktail of ideas was consumed heavily by various groups such as the German Order, the Thule Society, and promoted by the Ariosophists such as Guido von List, 1848, 1919, and George Lanz von Liebenfels, 1874-1954. Together, these individuals and organizations laid the foundation for a variety of ideas that informed Nazi race theory and contributed to the Nazi Holocaust, claiming the lives of over 20 million. While there were no direct links, most, if not all, of these individuals and organizations found inspiration and validation within the work of the Theosophical Society, and in particular in the materials of Madame Blavatsky. However, there are those who claim that Hitler had little interest in the occultism. Thus, before examining any connection between Nazism and occultism, one must answer the question as to whether Adolf Hitler, 1889 to 1945, had interests in the occult, because if he opposed it, it is unlikely that it would appear in the Nazi Party's theories of race. However, numerous links between occultism and the Nazi present themselves. There are still many prominent historians and biographies of Hitler that deny any connections between the National Socialist movement and the occult. In contrast, other historians have claimed that Nazism is unfathomable without understanding its connections to occultism. Raymond Sickinger has suggested that there is a middle way between these two positions, asking if it is possible to suggest that Hitler thought and acted in a magical way, and that he found a magical approach to difficult problems to be efficacious, quote unquote. This middle ground seems to be reasonable and has recently been backed up by materials taken from Hitler's personal library. In the May 2003 issue of the Atlantic Monthly, Timothy W. Rayback described his trip to the Library of Congress to examine a collection of 1,200 books taken from Hitler's library at the end of World War II, deposited in Washington, D.C., and then effectively forgotten. Among the books, Rayback found that 10% dealt with religious and occult themes. An important volume that Rayback located was Magic, Theory, History, and Practice, 1923, a book of occultism and magic by Dr. Ernst Schertl. Ryback notes that it was one of the most heavily marked books in the library, quote unquote, he continues. Hitler's copy of Magic bears a handwritten dedication from Schertl, sprawled on the title page in pencil. A 170-page softcover in large format, the book has been thoroughly read and its margins scored repeatedly. I found a particular thick pencil line beside the passage, "He who does not carry demonic seeds within him will never give birth to a new world." So let me just pause there. Let me just read this again. This is the quote from the guy's book when he was studying Hitler's library. He found this particular notation underlined. I found it, and I'll just read again. I found a particularly thick pencil line beside the passage, "He who does not carry demonic seeds within him will never give birth to a new world." Hitler's copy of Schertl's Magic was subsequently been reprinted and with his annotations denoted. Within the volume, we can not only find him highlighting the comment about carrying demonic seeds, we find a whole paragraph highlighted about magic and being a magician. Other suggestive annotations include statements such as, every demonic magical world is centered towards the great individuals from whom basic creative concepts emerge, from whom basic creative conceptions spring, quote unquote. Based on Rybak's discovery and the annotations by Hitler and Churl's book alone, we can confidently say that Hitler had at least a passing interest in occultism. However, this is not the only evidence as to Hitler's interest in the esoteric traditions. Hitler was also a reader of Ariosophic occult periodicals and promoted the publications of Kabbalah-based horoscopes of him and Nazi Party members. However, others within Nazism shared his interests. Thus, when Nazi occultism is investigated, a complex web of ideas and influences emerge. However, before examining the occult roots of Nazism, it is first necessary to review Blavatsky's occult theories of race to excavate the foundation upon which much of the Nazi theories of race were founded. So this is a little historical thesis paper that's been written up, and I just discovered it, and we're going through it, and it's going to go into show the context of this connection between the Lucis Trust and Blavatsky and Adolf Hitler. So let's carry on. Nazi race theories build on earlier European theories of race. One of the earliest attempts to systematize theories of race, and certainly one of the most influential, was presented by the French Count Arthur Gobineau in 1816-1882. In 1856, he published The Moral and Intellectual Diversity of Races. In this volume, he classifies the various races of humanity in a seemingly scientific way, perpetuating pre-existing categories in his book, such as Negro, quote-unquote, yellow, quote-unquote, and white, quote-unquote, races. These, he declares, are completely incommensurate and that the white race is superior. So this is going in to just show more proof that some intellects and some supposed philosophers and supposed schooled men at the time were perpetuating this idea based on Darwinism. Because, of course, right in this time, in the 1800s, Darwin is going to be putting forth his theory that, shows that ultimately some races are more advanced and more evolved, more scientifically progressed along than other races who are lower. So that's the polite way you say it in the 1850s context. So let's carry on here. Gobineau published his most famous work, an essay on the inequality of the human races, 1853 to 1855. In this discussion of race divisions, he notes that within the white races, the Aryans, so we're always tying this word, we're giving you a background where this word comes from, and its close connection with the occult societies. That within the white races, the Aryans are the most superior, and in contrast, the white races, in contrast to the white race, the Negroid variety is the lowest. So there you go. There's actually, in quotations, this idea of racial superiority that Hitler and others are going to seize upon. Gobineau's theories of race were very influential in both Europe and the United States. We find his categories being adopted by others, including Blavatsky. However, she recapitulates the theory of races, and she retains the divisions and the hierarchy established by Gobineau. So this idea of these terms, these classifications of ways of Negro, yellow, and white, these kind of color, this established color hierarchy of people in the world are broken down into this idea called races, begins at this time in a supposedly scientific way. So you can see that there are all these different varieties of culture around the world. You have Swedish people speak their own Swedish language. People in Russia speak Russian. People in England have their own English culture. And just because you have a grouping of people in the world who have less melanin in their skin doesn't mean they're all the same race. It doesn't mean they're all the same culture or language or they're all the same people, because they're not. And their heritage and their actual traits and their physical biology is completely unique and different than people that, if their only correlation is to say, well, they have less melanin in their skin, they're kind of pale, it doesn't mean they're all in the same race. So this whole idea, this whole nomenclature, and this whole kind of false dichotomy that we're presented here to choose, like, what color are you? Well, I think I'm a little bit darker, I think I'm black. Or I have kind of a lighter complexion, I guess I'm white. It's a ridiculous, unscientific, and insane way to categorize ourselves. And these are categorizations that were established by Gobineau, who was ultimately a racist and an occultist, whose theories were used to support Hitler's ultimate rise, the causation of his beliefs that there was a a superior race, the white race, which there is no such thing. There is no superior race, and there is no such thing as a white race or a black race or a yellow race. Those are just color categorizations that are just ridiculous. So let's get back to this. In his discussion of race divisions, he notes that within the white races, the Aryans are the most superior, and in the contrast to the white race, the Negroid variety is the lowest. Gobineau's theories of race were very influential in Europe and in the United States. We find his categories being adopted by others, including Blavatsky. However, she recapitulates the theory of races. She retains the divisions and hierarchies established by Gobineau. The first reference to the occult origins of races in Theosophy did not come from Blavatsky, but in the works of Alfred Piercy Sinnett, 1840 to 1921, a prominent Theosophist member. He had received a number of letters which he claimed were written by occult masters, or the Mahatmas, the famous White Brotherhood, residing in the Himalayan mountains. Based on these letters, he published The Occult World in 1880 and Esoteric Buddhism in 1883. In the latter, in the chapter entitled The World Periods, Sinnett describes the 7 phases of the human race has experienced previously and will continue to experience into the future. He goes on to note that present-day humans are in the 5th race. He claims that this race began over 1 million years ago, despite the fact that the 5th race began so long ago. There are remnants of the previous lower races. In The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, Anthropogenesis, Blavatsky builds on the foundation laid by Sinnett, or the Mahatmas, assuming one accepts the source of this information and expands upon it, filling in the holes and coalescing the whole system into a unity, which is claimed to come from an occult source, stanzas from the Book of Daizan. So now we're going into this Gnostic occult grimoires to perpetuate this idea of root races and racial theories. Reminiscent of Gobineau's categories, the Book of Daizan, this supposed Gnostic work, occult book that they're using to justify their theory, claims that after the flood that destroyed the 4th race, some yellow, some brown, and some black, and some red races remained. These make up the human race, which led into the emergence of the 5th race, the Aryans. According to Blavatsky's narrative, they will lead humanity forward spiritually. By her reckoning, the Aryan Hindu is derived from the oldest part of the 5th race. This leads the Europeans, who are also from various stages of the Aryan race, who trace their roots back to India. This is where Blavatsky claims humanity is at present, but in the future there will be a 6th and 7th races being born. And so, this just kind of goes on and on and on to the point that I'm trying to make. It just goes on. I'll just finish up. In the form presented by Blavatsky, the Theosophical human evolution narrative, it certainly supported assertions of the Aryan descent. It tries to mount just a small defense of Blavatsky here, which in my mind is completely lost. One of the leading scholars on the history of Theosophy claims that Blavatsky's discussion of race is very different than that of other racial theorists. So, of course, that's just absurd. He writes, Blavatsky's use of the term Aryan as the name of one of the root races has raised suspicion. So, I'm not going to really go into it any further. The point that really I'm trying to make is that at this stage in human history and human scientific development, Blavatsky is in the middle of this preposterous theorizing about race. And even though they want to try to blanket her now, cover her now, and say that she wasn't really a proponent of Nazism, the point is that she was establishing through her writings and through Theosophy the idea that the white race was superior, and that there was lesser red and brown races, and that the Aryan race would rise up to lead the way into the future. So despite that they're trying to erase a protection for her, I don't see that. I think that we can use this article, obviously, to support our premise that Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophy and the occult ideas that she promoted, including Luciferianism, the idea that the God of the Hebrews and the God of the Bible was this lesser created demiurge, like a genie or a demon who was just manipulating the Jewish people and who would be ultimately destroyed. That idea clashes entirely with the biblical premise that the God of the Bible, the Yahweh, is the Almighty, and He is the great God, and He is the creator of all things, and that there was a fallen angel named Lucifer who was deceiving the human race. So now you have this controversy. You have to decide who do you believe? Do you believe the God of the Bible, or do you believe this other individual, Lucifer, who claims to be divine light, who claims to be Sophia, and the Theosophists bring Lucifer out as the great Messiah, the great savior of humanity. And so that's really what's at the basis of the United Nations occult agenda. But no, regarding the Vril Society, they were totally obsessed with the idea that they were in communication with a higher plane of existence, and that they could communicate with angels and other beings from other dimensions. But yeah, not 100%. I was kind of blown away when I started reading about it, and I was like, what is this? This is so bizarre of a stripe of history that was taking place. The occult societies the occult societies in Germany were like full bore.
Yeah, Blavatsky was probably still around, or maybe at least her legacy was still out there.
Helena Blavatsky, I think she was riding high at that time. She was kind of early on with that. I don't know how long she lived, but she did have a compatriot later on. So I don't have any of it in front of me now, so we'll have to go and get all the information out. But she had a compatriot who was a Freemason, so she had Freemasons around her.
Wait a minute, maybe my times are mixed up, but wasn't Manly P. Hall like her? I thought he was like her spiritual heir.
I feel like he was younger. Yeah, I feel like he was younger. He was more in like, I'm just guessing at this point, but probably like in the 1920s, 1930s. So I think she was like an era before that.
Right, yeah.
But we'll have to go back and look. But then it was Alice Bailey who took up the whole thing after Helena Blavatsky, is what you're talking about. So
yeah.
And these were the occult underwriters and like the theurgic authors of all the books and all the doctrine that started to lead towards the United Nations. I think it really built up.
You took it right out of my head. Yeah, I was going there too. I think it was Nations.
Yeah, I think it was really building up during the League of Nations, but that fell apart.
Yeah. Before
1922, it didn't for whatever reason it didn't go forward. But the United Nations initiative did take off. So that was more like in 1945. I'll have to go back.
League of Nations was after World War I, and then United Nations was World War II.
Right, I guess you're right. But so it's kind of unbelievable that they just erected this. I mean, they erected this private organization. So just like any private organization, like Boy Scouts of America, or just any private organization, they just put together this one world government initiative that everyone's supposed to do. The decorum and the way that it's situated and built and the name of it. Everyone's just supposed to get the hint that this is the United Nations world government.
See, I thought it was a great idea when I was younger.
Of course.
I thought, what a great idea.
Right.
United Nations, keeping peace in the world and keeping humanity. I thought it was a great thing. Right. I didn't think a whole lot about it, but I did.
Everyone does. Even today, every awesome movie you watch, even if it's in the future or whatever, even this latest one where it's like the cool guy, it's like the future war or whatever. It's always the United Nations Council, and in the future or in every situation that is the kind of prevailing authority in the movie. Like, what I'm saying? So Hollywood promotes it, and so it's just, and the idea of this. I don't know where they do all these G7. Meetings. I don't even know who puts that together, and they all show up. I don't know. What I mean? It's strange.
I don't know either. Did you watch the United Nations ones? The references to it.
Yeah. No. I think we're gonna as we're going forward, we're gonna break that down for sure.
Yeah, because that is a really informative episode.
Right. He does a lot on it. He breaks it down. He goes deep into. That's why it's such a good material for us, because we can basically see all the. There's a lot of books that you have to go through and read, and they did all the work. So it's kind of like It's kind of like a research spot to check and find out information. Just details that it would take a long time to put together on your own. So.
Yeah.
I love it. I love going and checking all that, because after you chase down his details and his information, then it brings a lot into view,
Yeah.
So, I think it's interesting too how the inside of Freemasonry is built on the idea of having an interfaith religious system. Because that's why inside the lodge, you have to be a Freemason and go in there and see that in the lodge they have 3 main books or 3 main what they call lights in the lodge, and they have up there the Tanakh, and then they have the Quran, and then they have the King James Version Bible. So those are the 3 guiding principles that guide the lodge. So it's interesting because to the outsiders, they tell them that it's not a system of religion, but once you get on the inside and look,
yeah,
it really is. So
Mike really broke it down on that video that you sent me. He really broke it down how it was a form of Gnosticism, and how it was the same religion, basically, that the Jesuits are living. He really laid it down really well on that video.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, I think that behind the order, behind the society, and we always say,
if you believe in Gnosticism, you can read all the religious texts, and then you can put them together in your own form, where your belief system will be a culmination of all these other beliefs.
Right. Yep. No, you're right.
So Gnosticism and Kabbalah, I mean, God, man, I cringe when I hear the word Kabbalah. I don't know, for some reason.
No, you're right. I mean, the Kabbalah, and it goes through, what was it, the one book?
Yeah, you mean the Talmud and
the Talmud? The Talmud, right. You got it. Thank you. So that was my point. Before I said the Tanakh, but that's not really true. It's really the Talmud, and they're really talking about the Babylonian Talmud. And so that's where they get their Gnostic, magical inheritance from Babylon and Egypt. So it's coming through the Talmud, and of course that's in the lodge. So those are the things that they're mixing together to try to create one religious forum. And so ultimately, that's why they can invite people of all different religions to come in and join. And so that kind of religious practice that you see in the United Nations of building, one world religious initiative is really something that's been built into the core of Freemasonry since its inception, right? So that's what it's all about, And so if you go look and look at the Quran and the surahs and the hadiths, and you look at all that, you can see that they're calling for a holy war against the Jews, and Christians, and so it's really ultimately it leads towards Armageddon in my mind. It leads to the battle of Megiddo. That's really what is on the horizon. And people call it the apocalypse or whatever, but Armageddon is the battle of Megiddo, and I think that's what we're going to see line up here shortly.
Yeah,
and
Armageddon.
Armageddon.
I thought it was interesting. By videos, it kind of sent me off into this trail of thought when he was talking about the capstone on the Great Pyramid.
Right. The unfinished pyramid.
It's called the Ben. That's I've heard it from another source called the Ben. But anyway, it is separated from the rest of the pyramid, right? And it's hidden. So they're saying that the people at the top of the pyramid are separate from the rest of the humans, right? And they're hidden. They're hidden from us.
Right. No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that they're pointing towards another dimension. I think that the unfinished capstone really, but at the same time, in my mind, when I think of the Watchers, because you have to go back and look at the book of
Enoch,
the book of Enoch, and the book of Yasher, and all that. And as far as the Watchers, that's where you're going to get this foreign alien influence from other dimensions coming into play. And everyone's looking at the thing, they're thinking about UFOs or aliens or whatever, but that outside force, I think ultimately, if it's something that comes about the way that it looks like the prophecy ultimately lays out, I think it's really that influence at the capstone there, it's Luciferian, it's the idea of an ancient animosity, an ancient, spiritual adversary that is there to ultimately enslave mankind. I think that they're well aware of it, in their writings and stuff like that. So,
but if you look back in history, right now it's aliens. it's always, whatever that interdimensional force is throughout history, it is always just beyond the current technology. You know,
Right.
you have the witches, and you have what Alexander the Great. He was talking about what he saw was in his battles were these flying shields.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that Alexander the Great? I think it was. And at one time they're angels and demons or demons. Another time in history they're the gods.
Right.
Little g gods.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always they're always exhibit some characteristic that's just beyond our grasp of understanding. So now it's aliens and not ultrasonic, interdimensional travel and wormholes and everything, you know, things we're theorizing and thinking about. Well, there's this force out there that's separate from us that's exhibiting the same characteristics.
Yeah, I think that if you have to contemplate the nature of the world as we're dealing with it, and you have to imagine that, okay, there could be a creative force, a deity, you know, some kind of like beginning point, Big Bang point where an omnipotent Godhead created the universe. Again, that's the kind of thing that people reject when they're atheists. They can't imagine that there could be such a being, and so they figure it's absurd and that this is all just a phenomenalistic, materialistic experience, and it's all subjective. And so we just imagine that ultimately, by faith, people are just intuiting that there's a God force there. And if that's the case, if people come to the possible consideration of that idea, then you have to recognize that there's another danger, which is that there are wolves among the sheep, like we were talking about the other night. There are definitely forces that are here to destroy what God created. So that's what you're looking at. If you look at the whole entire epic of the Bible, it's really just the story about how an enemy, an angel, a fallen angel, went and corrupted and destroyed and tried to murder God's creation. You know what I mean? That's really what you're dealing with. If you look at the whole thing as it's staged, it's really actually like dealing with politics that are above the life age of the earth, because it's a war in the heavens. So it says that there was a war in the heavens.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what the warfare in the heavens now affected by the fall of Adam and Eve. The reality of our lives in this place, but that warfare in heaven over and above our like plane of existence is still in effect. You feel me? We're living through that.
Yeah.
So I think that in some level that the angels that fell had the free will to do so, to betray God, to form a confederacy against God, and the angels that remained ultimately had the free will to remain with God, and so that's how it has to remain. So this is not, you know what I mean? That's how it is. That's ultimately, he's letting this whole case judiciously, play out in the courts of heaven to say, okay, let's just see who's right. So that's in my mind.
It's an allegory of Job.
Right. Job's in the middle of that warfare.
We're Job. We're having to live out the whole thing and play every possibility has to be played out.
You know why Job didn't relent? Because it was on his honor. Because now it was him personally too that it was out of the only thing that he had to rebel and spite against everyone else that told him to capitulate was that he had this little rebellious, unbreakable hatred against the enemy of God, and so therefore he was going to remain true to God despite whatever happened to him, and he wouldn't curse God, or you know what I mean. God bless him.
Job is one book that supports Genesis 6 about the fallen angels,
right?
Because and
it supports also the Book of Enoch, like you were saying,
right? Because in the beginning, or towards the beginning of Job, God calls the sons of God are called into the court of heaven. Remember,
right?
And the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, the good sons of God are called, and Lucifer comes up with them. Remember, and then God says to Lucifer, basically, where have you been? What have you been up to? And he's like, walking back and forth between here and earth, and walking back and forth upon it. And he's just so cocky with him, and just recalcitrant, really.
Mm-hmm. But that's the thing that anyway. I think you're totally right. I think that it points out the nature. And and even the Bible, it warns about going into speaking of it. It reminds me of Lord of the Rings when they're like, don't say the name, Yeah, don't they would say something else. They would say something.
You bring power to it. Yeah,
right. Yeah, you know what I mean. So they ultimately, in my mind, you have to recognize that we are created by God, and so we're the target and we're the adversary of the enemy, and so he's. I think that's what you're looking at in the world. You're looking at these different points where there was incursion by the enemy into history, and that's the thing. People are looking for a great conspiracy or great controversy by which it would explain all these different machinations of the world, geopolitics, and the grand things that we were dealing with, the assassination of Shinzo Abe. I mean, God bless the man. I hope the Lord. Yeah. What I mean?
I couldn't believe how I don't know if I'm sure you've seen it, but on the news it shows the assailant, and he's right behind the Abe, wasn't it Abe?
Shinzo Abe, yeah.
That's right behind Abe. He's right behind. I mean, right behind him, and he's got the gun on him, and it's like. Think about if that were the president. Right. No one is going to be right behind the president like that. No one's going to be walking around. I don't know. It just seemed to me like maybe it wasn't just him. But I mean, from what they've said, yeah, it's just him. He has a personal vendetta against them. But it just seemed like it was. And I'm not the only one that thinks this. So I was talking to another guy about this.
So it's the Patsy. Hey, I heard. Now I haven't seen anything on this, but I heard just by reading through and just being in shock about the whole thing. I read that somebody said that it was like a JFK assassination situation. So I'm starting to kind of wonder what happened. I mean, I guess it was on camera, which is it's also like JFK. I mean, it's extraordinary that they caught the assassination of JFK on camera. I think that's it's not a coincidence.
It wasn't that so convenient the way the Zapruder film. It's just right there.
Yep.
Nothing to see here. Here's the video. This is it. This is all that happened.
And having an 8mm recorded shoulder mounted a camcorder like that at that time would have been about $50,000, and there wasn't a lot of them that So just somebody having it out that day and making the film is a pretty extraordinary event. You know what I mean? Because just people take it for granted, I can see it right on the TV. But it's just what I mean. Same thing with Shinzo Abe. I'd like to know more about what happened, but I feel bad for the people of Japan. I feel like that they're probably heartbroken, and this is going to empower China. This is good for China because he was the one who was Trump's buddy. He was the one who was pushing hard for Japanese nationalism. Yeah. But no, I was just saying, I think that behind the affairs of man are other workings of the enemy and of God, of good angels and fallen angels, in the lives of men, and so I think that we have to be aware of that. But yeah, I think when I see what's going on with the left, also they crave this abortion, they just crave this child euthanasia, infanticide, really is what it's called.
It's infanticide, yeah.
It's infanticide. It's baby murder.
Because look, if I go in and I hit a woman and I'm drunk and I hit her car and she's pregnant and that baby gets lost, you can bet I'm going to be charged with the death of that child.
Yeah, they're going to be blown away because they were looking forward to that family member who was coming just in a few months to be.
Yeah. And that's a very tricky area.
No, it's bizarre because anyway.
Scott Peterson, he murdered his wife.
No.
And she was pregnant, and he's serving consecutive sentences for killing her and the unborn child.
Right. Exactly.
But doctors kill unborn children scot-free. and they sell the tissue to different consortiums of
You gotta
pharmaceutical companies that buy the shit.
You gotta go see the truth, the Project Veritas videos where they sit down and they get the lady to be like, I'll get a Lamborghini, she's not, because she's selling these, she's like one of these abortion people who end up with the tissue, and apparently they were taking out the fetuses while they were still alive and they still had a heartbeat. The baby's body.
They were cutting the arms off of them so that they could pull them out. And Project Veritas is. They're in trouble for that right now. Someone's in jail. Someone's in jail, and their bond. I believe their bond is really high, but they're in jail from Project Veritas. I just ran across that not too long ago somewhere.
Well, I'm gonna go give them some more money.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up, and after we get off the phone here.
Yeah, we'll click it up. We'll support them, and we'll come in and we just got to fight this culture war. It's what it is. I mean, ultimately, you have to recognize that. I think that these people that are going to try to go to bat to try to keep in place, and I don't want to hear about the kids.
It's a godless world. It's a godless world, and they're thinking of it in godless terms.
No, they are.
There's no God. There's nothing matters. Human life is shit.
Right.
So why not stamp it out? I can't conceive of the whole abortion period.
I think that we should, as a nation and as a culture, we should do something different to deal with, with pregnancies when they come along. And ultimately, we need to make a peer culture that's ready to receive children and just take them into our homes and into our lives and into our families, rather than just people feeling like that's a really good way to just deal with it. I mean, ultimately, I think that in the world where it's about survival and they don't have any other solution, I mean, you can see that ultimately it's the world that made this whole thing possible, the whole system of abortion possible, like right down the street, you know what I mean? So it's the entire world system and the government. They're trying to make it where the federal government pays for it. So it's its own kind of a beast in its own self. You know what I mean? It has to be confronted. Kind of like slavery. It was a monolithic thing, and there has to be just a different way. Sometimes, women will get pregnant, and we should just still have the baby anyway, and just run with it. You know what I mean? No matter what. And I think that's my look at it. You know what I mean? I don't think an abortion is the way to go. Back in the day, it wasn't even possible. Even if things went wrong between people, and they were going to have a child that they didn't expect from someone they didn't expect, and ultimately they were still going to have that baby. It was just, you know what I mean? The idea of
what they should be talking about is birth control. Because you didn't have to tell me. When I was having sex, when I was a teenager, I knew what caused it. I knew what caused babies.
Right.
And I knew I didn't want one, and I used birth control. Why is the focus on killing the result? Why not the whole little ounce of prevention, right?
Right. No, I think you're right. No, I think it's a convenience now. I think everyone's saying, well, what if somewhere down the line, some uncle in the family rapes a little girl, and but that is so negligible. That happens less than 1%. It's not even really a thing. It doesn't account for 70 million aborted babies. That's just sexual convenience. It's a tool of sexual convenience now, and it's not healthy for women to just be like, oh, it was a blob of cells. Never mind. And it kind of cuts off motherhood. The whole thing happens to a woman when she gets pregnant and she becomes a mother, and the world shouldn't be making her terrified of it, to embrace it, Yeah. That's the nature of it. It's just, and women, it's a woman's thing too, ultimately we're talking about it, but we don't have any ladies here to talk about it too. So, it becomes a kind of absurdity, but you see what I'm saying? But we're fathers too, ultimately, and we love all of our children, and we wouldn't want to think of, them. So meeting with an end like that, it's just so horrifying to fathers especially too, partly because we are far removed from it, and it's something that you're trying to support your wife or your partner, your partner in any respect, in any kind of relationship. When the woman is going to have a baby, it's you're working hard. Everyone's dealing with getting ready for that, and it's a spiritual thing. So I think that when women get convinced that it's just not healthy. You know what I'm saying? And then the men are really not there. Like they're like a whole part of the equation of the pregnancy, and then they're just not there. So it becomes a woman's thing, which I'm not really sure if it is. It's really a man's problem. Like where's the man who started the pregnancy? Why don't we talk about that? That's so weird that's just a big old silent wall. That abortion just kind of clean. Abortion is a woman's problem, but it's really a man's problem if you look at it like from my point of view.
Yeah.
It's really that men are not being men, and these women weren't just hit with immaculate conception. There was a partner there, and they're going to kill the offspring. And then there should be no question, or there should be the offspring, the baby that's coming into the world doesn't get any kind of way to have a voice to speak. So that's why it's so kind of bizarre, the way we're dealing with as a culture and as a world. Apparently America has more abortions than every other country in the world, even China. So we have issues. Yeah. We have issues with it. That's why we have to look at it.
You reminded me of a meme that I saw, just from what you were saying. I was putting things together, and it said, if you don't want to get pregnant, don't have sex. And then, listen, and then under it has the Virgin Mary.
Right.
So what they're doing, you see how they're taking Christianity apart right there?
Right. No, I think that the Lord has a lot to say about abortion, especially when he said that, when he said that we must be born again. In the other spiritual parallels that he spoke about, he references this issue. As far as when we're cutting off another life, we know very well that you were born into this world from your mother, and then when you were cutting off a life, which I'm not accusing anything, I'm just saying that because in the end, when those people, those souls go to the Lord, they are going to ultimately just be rewarded with eternal life, and they're not. I don't think they're really sweating it. I don't think anyone in heaven is really sweating it, but the murder, guilt, and the blood in the land, because it's actually blood in the land. That cries out. That's what it says. That innocent blood is going to become a thing that the Lord is going to judge. So that's America's problem right now. And ultimately, if you think about it, I'll have something to say too about Roman Catholicism, because their doctrine, their immutable, unchangeable canon law doctrine, says that ultimately any children who die who are not christened in the Roman system go into purgatory, into limbo, where they sleep.
Limbo.
They're not welcomed into heaven because they haven't been sprinkled by Rome in the papacy. So, in my mind, that's just a horrible absurdity that even famous.
No, you're getting to the Anabaptists here.
Even famous like Voltaire, famous philosophers made fun of that. But ultimately, I think that it's kind of sickening too when you see that they have Catholics for abortion down there going insane in front of the Supreme Court. Then you have the War Room and Steve Bannon and other Catholics saying, "Oh, we don't like abortion." And it's like figure it out, guys. I think the Pope said he's not sweating it. He's like a Marxist Pope and a Jesuit Pope. And he's he's all for it. He was weird because he went in and blessed and made this whole spiritual pilgrim, this whole thing over Ukraine and Russia, like giving them like a sacred blessing. And then 3 months later, Putin 6 months later or whatever, Putin ultimately rolls his tanks in. So I just see the hand of the papacy behind that whole thing in the Ukraine. We did an episode about that. We were talking about that there was in Ukraine there was a situation like in ancient Orthodox churches that had never capitulated to Rome, and guess what is being bombed the heaviest right now? It's like these little Orthodox areas that So it's like it reminds me of the Serbs in Croatia and all that.
That's all from the schism, those churches.
Yeah, they're remembering back 1,000 years ago.
1100. Yeah.
That's ridiculous. But that's what we're dealing with. I think that ultimately they're not going to forget their program. They're just going to keep on working it. We were talking about the alignment between the Illuminati, which came into existence right there in 1773, and that was right at the same time that the Jesuits were suppressed, because Clement XIII, he was murdered, he was poisoned, and then they came in with Clement XIV, and he was so upset he actually signed it, and he suppressed the Jesuit order.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not gonna die.
Right.
Someone else is it.
So let's take a few minutes here and cut into our interesting conversation to introduce this clip. This is some of the Professor Walter Veith info and intelligence that we'd like to introduce a lot in this program. So here's some of the background with the United Nations.
When we think about the United Nations, then we think about exactly that. An organization, a political organization bringing the nations together. And that sounds like something commendable. And the question is that all that there is behind it? Do you remember that at the Tower of Babel, God separated the nations? Now, if you look at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York, this is really quite a fascinating building. It is large, and the name United Nations was coined by United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt and was used in the Declaration by United Nations of January 1942 during the Second World War, when representatives of 26 nations pledged their governments to continue fighting together against what they called the Axis powers. Interesting name, Axis powers. Today there's another axis that is being fought, and that is known as the Axis of Evil. Have you heard of that? The forerunner of the United Nations was the League of Nations, and this was an organization in similar circumstances during the First World War and established in 1919 under the Treaty of Versailles to promote the international cooperation and to achieve peace and security. This comes straight from the UN webpage, so nothing strange about that. It's just plain history. Some more from that. In 1945, representatives of 50 countries met in San Francisco at the United Nations Conference on International Organizations, and they drew up the United Nations Charter. And those delegates deliberated on the basis of proposals worked out by representatives of China, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, United States at Dumbarton Oaks, United States in October 1944. It was signed on 26 June 1945. 50 countries. Poland was not represented and became one of the original 51 member states. So it officially came into existence on the 24th of October 1945, when the Charter was ratified by China, France, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, United States, and by a majority of the other signatories. And on the 24th of October, they celebrate the founding of the United Nations. Now, let's have a look at this Charter of the United Nations. This is a very interesting piece of history. Well, Arthur Balfour, do you remember that name? We've used it before. Who was a member of Hort's Apostles? Remember Hort? This was the professor that helped to produce the Greek text that changed the emphasis of the Bible and removed many of the aspects of Jesus Christ's power and sovereignty from the Word of God. And the apostles were the secret society that functioned and at that time, and Hort was a member, as well as Arthur Balfour. Hort called this group a Senior Apostles Club, as well as president of the Psychic Research Society, Society for Psychic Research, soon became Prime Minister of England, Arthur Balfour, and instrumental in the First League of Nations. So this Prime Minister was also, of course, active in the writing of the original Charter of the League of Nations, much of which formed the basis for the United Nations. He not only headed the Society for Psychic Research, holding seances at his home, but he initiated a group called the Synthetic Society, whose goal was to create a one-world religion. That's a very interesting point of history. And he invited a certain Frederick Mayers of the Society of Psychic Research to join, and together they created the preamble of all religions, and it includes the dogma, departed spirits can communicate. Obviously, if you belong to such a society, then that is part of the situation. So built in somewhere over there was the wish to bring all religions together. Now let's have a look at some of the historic figures of the United Nations. Alger Hiss, he became the acting Secretary General of the establishment of the United Nations. The April 16, 1945 issue of Time magazine called him one of the State Department's brighter young men. It was Hiss and Joseph E. Johnson, who later became secretary of the Bilderbergers, so here we have all the secret societies again, who wrote much of the United Nations Charter. So very high Freemasons, Bilderbergers, were responsible for this charter.
So that's to introduce our Vythe audio clip. Now we're going to get back to the conversation, but we just want to introduce that information. And the video will be in the show notes too, so hopefully people will look at it. But my point right now, the point that we're really trying to make is that there was a lot of British agency, as far as high up lordship, aristocracy, and British imperial government power. Whereas Arthur Balfour is up there with like Milner. And with Rhodes, like Cecil Rhodes, like that's round table level stuff.
Yeah.
So this particular fellow, Balfour, is involved in the creation of psychic research, and they have a high level interest in the occult doctrine that Blavatsky is like peddling. You know what I mean? So Helena Petrovna Blavatsky is one of the main doctrinaires or preachers or prophets of this new age that has everything to do with looking at the universe through the lens of like a horoscope or like sun signs, like are you a Pisces or an Aquarius?
Luciferian doctrine.
Right. It's a Luciferian doctrine. That's really what's underpinning the foundation of the United Nations. So they understand it totally to be, it's an adversarial move towards the God of the Bible in the sense that they're trying to...
He wants to ascend the throne of the Bible. That's what it says in Isaiah.
Right.
It says... "O Lucifer, how you have fallen." And then he goes in to talking about his high ranks and among the angels in heaven. And he was the covering cherub. He's the covering cherub on the
around the
Ark of the Covenant.
Right, around the throne in heaven. Which the Ark of the Covenant here that the Israelites had was really just ultimately a symbol of what was in heaven. So it was the temple, the temple and the arrangement of the Holy of Holies and the cherubim and all that were supposed to be emblematic of what was in heaven. So
they were told by God. They were told by God to do that. They didn't do that on their own.
But they followed the measurements and the cubits and the determinations to make it how it was supposed to be from Scripture. Yeah. But let's just digress back. The point is that ultimately the United Nations is a reconfederating of the nations of the world back into a singular international world body, which was what they were trying to achieve in the beginning with Nimrod under Babel, when he had...
Well, yeah, Babel. Oh, yeah, definitely Babel. And
Nineveh.
Just as a side note, Google Translate is a rebuilding of Babel.
Of course, yeah, technologically.
Because, you can communicate with anyone in the world.
No, it's true. It's getting really effective as a tool, as a technological tool to overcome the communication barrier, which is like really, it's kind of a mystifying thing how if we all evolved on a Darwinistic level from the same sources, we would ultimately speak the same language. So it's kind of bizarre that we have so different languages with such different characters. But also, if you think about it, Blavatsky...
We're supposed to be separate. And that showed we were supposed to be separate from the world. And when God says, "Come out of the lake," what's that mean?
How God wanted to separate the people, you know what I mean, from joining together in one confederacy against God, you know what I mean? So this whole...
Well, I said we're supposed to come out of Babylon, my people.
Right.
Come out and be separate.
Right.
That means separate from the world system. And I said, I don't know exactly how to do that.
Well, you definitely have to do it.
You do it through a church?
Well, you do it in different ways.
The church is corrupted.
Yeah, no, you're right. You do it in different ways, but you do it in your heart and your mind first. And then you try to do it in your life, but we're definitely we're definitely in the world system. We're definitely looking around and seeing the growth of Babylon, the growth of the globalist system as it begins to take over the nations of the world and begin to use the apparatus of the one world system, to bring everything online. That really is the reason why we have to discuss it, though, is because at the heart of the United Nations organization is a Luciferian agenda, and it has an entire system of doctrine that basically deposes.
Written by Alice Bailey,
Right.
Under her pseudonym, some of them, but under Lucis Trust.
Lucis Trust. That's right. So Lucis Trust was Lucifer publishing house before, and they were one of the primary ideological and financial contributors to the beginning origins of the United Nations. And so, it's important that we go back and take a look at it and try to expose to people what is really taking place here. And I think it really, in my larger perspective, when you look at it from a 30,000 feet view, you can see that the nature of anti-Semitism is built in to this, to the racialism of the Theosophical religious principle, and that is that that some races are lesser and some races are greater than others. So that's built into, especially Alice Bailey and Blavatsky's original writings. The idea of the greater races and the root races and all that. So that kind of it's kind of bizarre that's kind of it's built in there, and I find it strange also when it comes to Mormonism, that Mormonism also has this kind of under this backstory about nations, tribes of American Indians who were
lost tribes of Israel.
They were also cursed because they had darker skin, but then they had this massive battle, and it has this kind of mythology that goes with it. So when you look at Theosophy and Blavatsky, you see the same thing. There's this weird racial ideology, this racialism that kind of it permeates the mythos of her writings. That there was these ancient races and that there was these battles, and so I find it utterly bizarre and kind of fascinating too.
What about the Tibetan, the channeling of the Tibetan?
Oh, as far as
Alice Bailey, I believe.
Yeah, that was really at a time when it was coming, when the Far Eastern ideas were kind of sweeping, Eastern mysticism, Eastern, belief systems were becoming more and more prevalent and more known about. And I think that they kind of fixated on this idea of Shangri-La, this high, Himalayan place where there was an ultimate masters of wisdom. The White Brotherhood existed there. I think this was the charlatan part of it, where they kind of as seance holders and as mediums, they were kind of charlatans, and they would convince people that they had met the Tibetan masters, and they were getting, they were channeling.
Well, the Tibetan was an actual channel being.
Right. No.
Called the Tibetan. But I can see where you're leading to. Yeah.
Well, I question the whole thing. As far as maybe they thought they were engaging in it, and maybe there was some spiritism actually happening. As far as what was the one guy, Dwal Ghoul? Was that because I know they used that name in the Mothman movie? Yeah, the Mothman movie. But that was one of the Dwal Ghoul. But that was one of the supposed Tibetan masters that she would channel and communicate with. So people really believed this shit at the time, and it was a really big deal. But what I'm really concerned with is they have this really complex religious ideology that's built into environmentalism. It's built into the World Health Organization, the UN, the World Health Organization, and it stipulates that this whole idea of Sophia and the divine light and this lesser demiurge, this lesser god Yahweh, who came down for all intents and purposes.
He thinks he's the god of the world.
But so now we're getting into the twists and turns of this. But from their point of view, from their Luciferian point of view, they look at the God of the Bible as a real deity, but then he's a lesser and kind of an evil, and he's really the devil. Ultimately, they paint Lucifer as the great divine light, and they they project Jehovah as this fallen creature, this kind of like demiurge who does all this, and so that's really where the backstory of anti-Semitism really begins, because anti-Semitism comes into play at this point when you realize that the Luciferian agenda hates the Bible, and it hates the doctrines of Yahweh, but it also hates the people of Yahweh who are Jewish. So I mean, obviously, if you paint Yahweh and paint Jehovah as this evil god of destruction, this bloodthirsty god who hates lambs because he always has to have some lambs murdered to perpetuate sin, and those are the kind of the emblematic negative imagery that Luciferians project about Yahweh.
Yeah.
Right? So the point is that ultimately, if you're the people of Yahweh, and you have the people of the Torah and the Ten Commandments, then obviously you would be, the target of this whole system. You're right. This whole religious doctrine that is built in, so that's Lucifer worship that's built into the UN, ultimately is simultaneously the heart of anti-Semitism. People just don't really understand that complexity. They haven't really, and normal people who have to worry about gas prices don't necessarily care about Luciferian occultism at the United Nations. But ultimately, that's what's driving the one world system forward. And eventually, people are going to have to confront it, whether they realize it or not. So, but
isn't the after Jesus dies on the cross, isn't the in the temple the curtain is rent from the top down?
Yeah, that's right.
Symbolizing the end of the hatred of lambs, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I mean, I think he
was the final lamb.
He was ultimately the blood that is shed for all humanity, and the Passover symbolism of the lamb is symbolic of Yeshua, of Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, the blood on the lintel, and
but at the same time, if you rewind the tape back far enough, and you're trying to satisfy this New Age urge for UFOs, and you create an entire doctrine centered on this idea that the God of the Bible was just one of many little gods who was running around and who created the human race, and who, and who was experimenting, and so, with his UFO, I mean, those are the kind of Scientology-like teachings that are coming out of the UN and even the Vatican these days. So that's kind of what we're getting into as we're going farther into it.
I mean, remember the Vatican. I mean, the dragon was cast out of heaven, and he swept a third of the angels with him. So he's got a lot of angels that can masquerade as UFOs. They could easily that would not even be hard for them.
Right. No, there's definitely a controversy there about something.
And they are interdimensional beings.
Right. Well, I mean, everything is there in the scripture as far as talking about those who are Ariels, or those who are like the god of the air, the prince of the power of the air, those kind of like
Beelzebub.
Yeah. And we know that the enemy, the adversary, has fallen down from above down to us here, and is dealing with us and manipulating us and interfering with us here. So we don't have, they're not in some far away other dimension where maybe that's where other angels are at, but the ones who are fallen are down here with us. So that's why it says, that the enemy is like a roaring lion going across the earth, back and forth, across the earth. So people are not aware of the possibility of a spiritual enemy that's trying to find a way to destroy them, you and me, and everyone. You know what I mean? So these are the doctrines that the United Nations are dedicated to, and they lift up Lucifer, and they worship him as a higher entity than the God of the Bible. And they figure that the interference that God had with the people of Israel, and the interference, because I mean, look at the God of the Bible was very destructive. He destroyed Babylon historically. He cursed it and saw it destroyed. He destroyed Egypt. He's a God who takes it upon himself to destroy when he wants to.
He destroyed it through men, Cyrus, and the Medes of Persia, and then further destroyed it after that.
Yeah, so you could take that as he's a mean God, or you could take it that he's the creator of existence and he has sovereign will to fight the enemy. And that's what we were talking about before. I think we're seeing a prosecution of warfare, and an angelic warfare and heavenly war throughout history. So he's going into history. He's going to be involved. He's going to be in the with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's going to be in the fiery furnace in Babylon. So
do you think we'll see the writing on the wall again at some level?
Well, I mean, at the same time, that human finger that wrote on a human scale, in human letters, that human hand was a Christophany, was the person of Jesus Christ himself as he passes through all time. So I think he can interfere sovereignly in history at will. So there's no way for him to be overcome. He can let history play out as long as he wants. He's victorious. You know what I mean? So the enemy just is caged in, trying to find ways to have humanity destroy itself with idea viruses. Like the guy who has to suicide bomb others to placate his idea about God. That's demonic. You know what I mean? That's the kind of thing we're talking about. The strongholds are in the world,
yeah,
and they're very destructive and they're murderous. They're always murderous. So you can see when the enemy is operating when humans are murdering each other.
Well, we were told how you need to bring this. This is a worldwide New World Order operation. These are basically, if you really dig into the people behind it first, if you want to hear that, are these Rothschilds, are these Rockefellers, are these basically Sabbatine Satanists, all the way to the Vatican on down, to the kings and queens in England, to Canada, to all these key roles, Saudi Arabia, going down the line. And these folks have been practicing basically Satanism, without a better word, is where they actually report or pray to what they call Baal, which other people call Satan. Some people call him the jinn in Islam. They call them all different names in different religions, and they have successfully throughout the eons hijacked every religion. First, they started with Judaism. Now they hide behind anti-Semitism, and they're not even Jews. They're not Judeans. They're not at all. And then they move on they get involved in Christianity. They pretend to be Christians, and they hijack that. They bring in Freemasonry. They do that as well. They have infiltrated throughout the eons Islam, and they bring them in on that level. They do the opposite, invert everything that they would do. And these folks have worked their way into a position of key roles in our society across the world. They became the popes. They became the kings and queens. They worked away. They started the Russian Revolution and got rid of the Tsar, and then there was payback. They did the same thing with the Freemasons and so on down the line. And they have ability to hijack these different groups. They do they're very clandestine and very cleverly, and they come in acting like they're your friends, and they're deceivers, and they deceive and they lie, and they indoctrinate their children into believing what they believe, that, hey, we're very special, we worship this over here. That's where different sides, they take over the media, they take over the net, they take over the governments, they blackmail, and they do whatever they can do, murder, they do it at presidents, they do whatever they do to get in. And they do this on a generational level. You're talking about, this original Babylonian lifestyle of Satanism being carried to this day, but with a modern code put on it. And so now we're here seeing the end results, and this is what we got. What we got is Hollywood, is sex trafficking, and the pedophilia is it's infested. You got the George Soros is infested. They use these proxy groups to be the bad guy, like Antifa and so on the line. You got, the Podesta brothers who are blatant Satanists right out there. You got the presidents, Republican and Democrat alike. So they infiltrate over a period of time, and what they do is they create this level of chaos. And their goal is to bring in this one world. They call it full spectrum dominance. And how they decided to do was to the toe in the door is to use tyranny, healthcare tyranny, as their foot in the door. And that because they don't care about your health. If they cared about your health, the companies they own, like Monsanto, many others, they wouldn't be poisoning you for the last 30, 40 years. They wouldn't be putting sodium fluoride in your water for the last 70 years. They wouldn't be doing all these horrific things collectively and allowing, and I'm not saying every one of them is conscious of doing it. A lot of them were just bought out. They don't even realize they're doing it, but for the inside of that spider web, where the real Satanists are, most people don't know what their goal is. But I'm giving you just my perspective of what I've seen and put together, interviewing just people that you know as well. I'm probably telling you stuff that you already heard. And as these people come together, they take over and they keep their rituals. They do the rituals. As David Wilcox told me, that they do the rituals usually twice a week on Wednesday nights, 3 o'clock in the morning. They go out and whether that's whatever it is, and they do the rituals to keep their momentum going for this new world order. And so they had to first, what they do to each country they go into is they demoralize it. And you demoralize it by what they put out in Hollywood. You keep raising the bar higher and higher. Now you got, little 12-year-old transvestites and transgender kids running around at strip clubs. Who would have ever allowed that to happen 10 years ago or 5 years ago? It wouldn't happen. But you do that over time. You demoralize a country, and you get your soldiers where they're not fighting good wars anymore. They're fighting for other countries and for other international purposes. And then after that, you destabilize the country. You start making the CDC, who's supposed to be looking out for your best interests. You make them a profit-making, patent-oriented, vaccine-loving private organization. And you tell them that they're looking out for your best interests. So listen to them. Where they're making now billions, if not trillions in time, on vaccines that are unnecessary and that are actually dangerous when you get into it. And so you destabilize the different FDA, you destabilize the different agencies, you corrupt all your politicians, you on a local level, you get the Agenda 21 in there, which is the New World Order agenda, and you get that in place in the different cities, in the different towns, and then your third level is you create this crisis. You create a crisis, and we just experienced a crisis, the pandemic crisis, in this last year and a half, and that crisis was the COVID-19. And then, finally, the fourth step to really bring the New World Order in which we're almost there, we're going to be getting there soon if we don't step up, is you bring the new normal. You already hear about the new normal, right? And the new normal is not what we think by wearing masks, not wearing masks, or getting vaccinated or not getting vaccinated. That's just a stepping stone into the new normal. That's not the new normal. The new normal is what they call this worldwide, world spectrum dominance plan. And that's going to be the surveillance, which they already got in place. The 5G's already in place. Here in Georgia, they sold our governors gave all the right-of-ways to our everybody's home in Georgia, in front of their houses, give them away to the communication tech companies privately. Now, they own them, and your county can't do anything about it. So they can put their 5G masts up there in towers. And that's going to be a direct energy weapon at your house now. And that will be part of the Internet of Things. So their goal is now to bring us into this new, they call it the Great Reset, which they're in the middle of doing right now. They're resetting us to be basically cyborg transhumanism, cyborg energies, human hand, and artificial intelligence, with all this nanotechnology they're uploading us all the time. And as well as a depopulation plan to get rid of the majority of the people that are here on Earth because there are too many of us controllable. That's the end game. And they're now going into the new normal. And what we have to expect over this next year is more false flags. They're using the Delta variant more likely, or some other variant coming out to just going into the new normal. And what we have, human hand and artificial intelligence, with all this nanotechnology they're uploading us all the time. And as well as a depopulation plan to get rid of the majority of the people that are here on Earth because there are too many of us controllable. That's the end game. And they're now going into the new normal. And what we have to expect over this next year is more false flags. They're using the Delta variant more likely, or some other variant coming out to justify the next lockdown, which could be as soon as the next couple of months. We don't know here in the States. They're already doing it in many other countries. Australia, all those other countries now are locking down, getting ready for the new variant. And by the way, as we learned on one of our shows, I think it was called the variant, that these variants burn down. They never burn up. So how can more people be being killed by Delta variant when they're supposed to be burning down? It's all lies. People are dying now from the Trojan horse vaccines that they are voluntarily injecting into their body. because no one ever told them what's in it. And it's so obvious that no one ever told them. It's not even in the pamphlets they give you when you're supposed to ask for it by the doctors. Doctors go along with it too. They're just as clueless as the rest. And so as we build these payloads of nanotechnology in our body, we become more disconnected from being a human. And it affects our brains. And if you're able to look at some of these things under a microscope, it's horrific. Horrific to see how this nanotechnology that they're injecting into them, if people knew that, they would never even think about doing it. They would arrest these people, string them up right there in the court, and it would be over with. But because it's all being done clandestine and lies, and the mainstream media now is controlled by these people we talked about, and they control it through fear, murder, and bribery, and blackmail. So, and it's been in place not just in this last year, this process has been in place for a long time. They co-opted the CIA, basically from the get-go, and they've been working for them in the beginning. They have co-opted the different countries, the major countries, and as you see the countries that don't go along with it, you've seen them right now in the last year, three of these poor African and South American countries, they kill them. They kill the presidents. Haiti's president killed, and watch. Prior to him being killed, they were all against the vaccine. I'm not even keeping up with it. I can guarantee you, the next president there is going to be pushing the vaccine. Same thing with, I think it was Madagascar or Zimbabwe or somewhere around there. Yeah, and they were prior, they're against it. Now they're for it. Go figure. And it's all CIA and their goal for this world spectrum dominance. And it is evil people. These are evil Satanist people, such as the Rothschilds and the rest of them. And they have, I know people knew. You look across Schwab. He's a relative. He's a son of a Rothschild, or Marianne, I believe her name, Rothschild. So they're all not a big group of them, but they're so powerful because they control the money, and the money controls the people's decisions. I mean, I have family members now who know what I'm talking about, who believe what I'm talking about, but are still going to get the vaccine because now their job's in jeopardy. I mean, come on, man. I mean, where is your sense of faith? Where's your sense of a soul, understanding that? And right now, they got the majority of the people. I'll give them credit. They got these Sabatines got the majority of the people in hate. They got them in fear and hate right now, and I hate it. That they got them in fear and hate. But the only way out of that is through love, and that's what why we started United Intentions Foundation and the UI Media Network, which our tagline is raising the frequency. We got to raise the frequency of love to be able to eliminate that level of hate. And I think that's kind of hopefully what we're trying to do each day as we go forward with our network and our shows.
Yeah, and I'd agree that your thoughts on death. My view is that we're all dead anyways. We're all dead anyways. If you think about it, you're actually dead. We're all going to die. It could be in a few years, a few decades, but you're already dead. So that's going to happen. You can't avoid it. So you might as well stand up. We think of all those images, Braveheart and all those movies, and I cannot not tell the truth because I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't look in the mirror every day. So I have to tell the truth regardless of the consequences. And, speaking of the Delta variant, I like to joke, half jokingly say, but I believe it. I'm waiting for the Alpha and Omega variant, because Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, and that he will return one day. So I'm waiting for those variants. And as well, you mentioned the esoteric and the spiritual dimension. And I think a lot of people who follow these things geopolitically and economically of what's happening, if you're not tuned into the esoteric or spiritual nature of things, I think you miss out on a lot of understanding of what's really happening. I have here in a box, I should have taken it out. I have a box here with just some files and papers. And I was studying diplomacy in Geneva in 2008 and 9. And I attended one of the meetings of the Lucifer Publishing Company, Lucis Trust. They have 3 offices in New York, London, and Geneva. And I said, hey, people, I talk about this stuff, people think I'm crazy. I'm going to go to one of their meetings, get some of their handouts and prove, this is not some conspiracy theory. And I have here the document. It's 2009, and it was a meeting about their esoteric stuff. And it actually says on the paper, Lucifer is like the Prometheus who's bringing fire to mankind. And they are Theosophists. Alice Bailey founded the Lucifer Publishing Company in 1922. They changed the name to Lucis Trust. And they're a formal member of the United Nations. And they actually believe that Lucifer is the Messiah, that he is the Maitreya, the Mahdi, the Christ, and they're preparing for his return. I subscribe to their newsletters. And there's a lot of influential people who support, the UN, the Lucis Trust. And as you laid it out, this is documented. It's not some crazy stuff. So you mentioned the new normal, and that was one of my questions. How people are, which I think is basically the social credit system that we see in China. People are now being deplatformed in real life. There are upstanding citizens. This is happening in U.S. and other countries, Europe. They're having bank accounts terminated. Recently, two folks, Laura Witzke, I think, I forget her name. She had a Wells Fargo account terminated, PayPal accounts terminated, other financial services, Airbnb, Uber, being put on no-fly lists now. People being put on no-fly lists in the U.S. And people's reputations being attacked through wokeism and cancel culture. At some point, trying to live a normal life will become insanely difficult. And this is the cashless society, the social credit system. It's here now.
So that's just a little, I had to just play the entire clip and let you kind of get a good listen to their little discussion there. And I think that we're all kind of circling the same dilemma. We're all discussing the same difficult position that we're in as people, as plebs, as just regular run-of-the-mill common folks in the world, men on the land, free men who have to find a way to, subsist with this technotronic tyranny coming online. I just wanted to point out there that his discussion and his research into Lucis Trust, into the United Nations, into Alice A. Bailey and Helena Blavatsky is just kind of, touching the outer edge of what we really need to delve into and to get into this discussion, to understand the occult and Luciferian nature of the religious system that has subverted our global system. And of course, this is a syncretism, an occult Babylonian syncretism, an ancient craft, an ancient system of occult practice. It's been carried on generationally for a long, long time. And of course, this is the system of world power that the elites belong to, and it's the club that they initiate into when they become Freemasons and when they get up to these higher orders and they become members of the elite dominating classes like these Klaus Schwabs and World Economic Forums. When you get to this level, the spiritual initiation totally changes from something that's very hateful of Jews. It's something that's the system of anti-Semitism itself, which is the Gnosticism that is being taught at the highest levels in the Vatican, so that the outer religious exoteric ideology for the people, for the masses, for the goyim, right, the ignorant masses, is Christianity. But when you get on the inside, when you get in the inside of this system, the esoteric system is hidden, and of course it's going to be Mithraic, and it's going to be this mystery religion, the mystery cults and mystery school that came out of Egypt and Babylon, which is ultimately opposed to Yahweh. It's opposed to the spiritual axiom of the Bible. It's opposed to this idea of Yahweh, this sovereign, absolute God who rules over creation and who set mankind as the pinnacle of creation. And so this is the getting into the Luciferian warfare, this warfare of doctrines between, is the God of the Bible the true God, or is the God of the Bible a dark, vile, evil God, and we need to look to Lucifer, the light bearer. So that's the dilemma that we're getting. That's the great controversy that we're delving into here. So just breaking from the conversation really briefly, just to introduce another audio clip, I would be remiss if I didn't introduce this discussion with Geopolitics and Empire with Matthew Arrett, and he's discussing the background of some of the British policies regarding America and the moves that were made there at the beginning of the Revolution. There was moves to make Canada a 14th colony that would become part of America. And of course, there was resistance there. And of course, as you're moving along through this process of trying to maintain empire, maintain imperial control over the world, you're going to see that Arthur Balfour, Lord Balfour, and Lord Milner, and Lord Cecil Rhodes are going to be part of the power structure that's going to set up the round table groups and is going to set up the Pilgrim Society and going to set up some of the other secret links within the esoteric secret societies that tie the papal knighthood orders to their commercial holdings and to their corporate structures throughout the stock markets and throughout the various system of global trade that they have in place now. And so as we look at this move towards Balfour, or Arthur Balfour is going to be at the center of the build-up of the League of Nations and the actual design of the United Nations later on. And so you can see that ultimately the British Empire is being converted from a colloquial national empire to a global government. And they're transferring their power into this global government through this system of the United Nations. So that's why we need to look closely at Balfour here. So let's listen to this fascinating background history.
For those who don't know, Canada is set up as the only monarchy of the Americas, and that's a bit confusing for people. Like, why is it a monarchy? You know, we're about to have an election. It was just announced randomly. Like, that's how things work in a monarchical parliamentary system. Is you don't have set organized election processes. Like, literally the minority government just said, we want to have an election. They asked the Queen's hand in Canada, the legal head of state called the Governor General, for permission. The Governor General gave a royal assent. So now we're announced that we're going to have an election in 3 weeks. That's weird. That's a weird way of doing things. So what is Canada, and why did we fail the Ben Franklin Challenge is one of the early chapters where I make the point Ben Franklin was up here for weeks in 1776 before the signing of the Declaration. He wanted, obviously, he had a lot of allies in Quebec who felt a great sympathy for the U.S. cause. They had no love for the British, who had abused the French quite a bit after the 7 Years' War. So why did they fail to still, despite all of that, accept the offer to join as the 14th colony? So I elaborate upon that. I go through some of the elements of the British intelligence operations using Jesuitical operatives as well, who were firmly ingrained and entrenched in the Canadian establishment. Like Bishop Briand was one of them, who basically passed a rule saying that you will go to hell and burn forever because you'll be excommunicated as a farmer if you fight with Washington. So that scared, burning in hell forever was not attractive. The other thing was the warm blanket clause. So, we were given by British, Briand said, the bishop said that if we stay allied to the king, we will be granted local controls, local democratic controls for the first time that we would have never dreamed of having before. And so that was a bribe. It was called the principle of enfourape, which is a French word currently in use to describe being screwed over. But the word comes from English, infer wrapped, or wrapped in fur. So they basically just wrap people in a warm, furry blanket and be like, just stay with Papa. And so we failed. And as a result, there was a British intelligence hand always available in the Americas to subvert the USA itself, and to, over time, and this is not a new thing, and in my book I go through how you had people like Aaron Burr, the guy who sets up Wall Street, the Bank of Manhattan, who kills Alexander Hamilton, who interfaced very closely with his nephew, the Governor General of Canada, to create the first effort in 1800 to break up the United States when it was just a couple of decades old. And the idea was that, he was running for the presidency against Jefferson. He was going to win, in all likelihood. If Hamilton had not intervened in Jefferson's defense, Burr would have won. And the idea from that standpoint was to create a northern free state confederation allied with the British and tied into British territories in Upper and Lower Canada. So that would have been one new nation, a confederation that would have dissolved the Constitution completely, as the slave states would have become their own confederacy, again, allied to the British, because who's buying the cotton? It's the British. Who's controlling the shipping routes? It's the British. Who's controlling the banking system internationally? It's still the City of London back then. That's not a new thing. So the fact that Aaron Burr is also in the middle of setting up Wall Street, and the bank, which becomes, JP Morgan becomes part of the Bank of Manhattan that he sets up and kills Burr, it's not a coincidence. So all that to say, Canada is always there. And when Burr is about to go to jail for the third attempt to break up the United States that he's caught for, when he's in 1807, just 7 years later, he's already killed Hamilton. He's now working with a bunch of traitors in the Federalist Party to create a Western Confederacy after the Louisiana Purchase, and he sets up himself to be the head of this new thing that was going to declare war on Mexico, or on Spain, and take control of Mexico, take Louisiana and New Orleans, using American mercenaries from Andrew Jackson's house, which was the headquarters. Andrew Jackson his manor provided the home base of recruitment. And somebody blew the whistle. at the time before it could be carried out. And the idea was to install Aaron Burr, after that succeeded, in the White House in Washington, D.C., after deposing the sitting president, who I guess would have been Jefferson. That was uncovered before it could happen. Again, it required some serious Anglo-Canadian operations to make that happen. And where did he go to avoid arrest? Montreal, Canada, where again his nephew is still the Governor General, who sets him up with letters that he takes with him to London, where he stays for 5 years until 1812. In Jeremy Bentham's house, the guy who was the head of British intelligence, sets up Aaron Burr in an orgy-filled opium den of his debauched manner, which Aaron Burr calls the best time of his life, and he meets with Lord Castlereagh. He's interfacing directly with these guys who are arranging the Congress of Vienna just in 1815, just a few years later, right, to reimpose dictatorship and, monarchical systems of control onto Europe after Napoleon. So he's meeting, and then he's deployed back into the United States. A week before the War of 1812 is launched. Why? Because there's a new operation to dismantle the U.S. in another way using its Canadian operations. And this becomes the next 40-year dynamic is shaped by the Burr machine, which involves Martin Van Buren, involves Andrew Jackson, who later on goes on to kill Alexander Hamilton's second Bank of the United States. Canada was really at the time just a few little provinces on the Atlantic side, 4. And then British Columbia was this isolated lone colony. What was separating, what was the rest of Canada? It was a private company for the past 260 years before that called the Rupert's Land, aka Hudson Bay Land. It was a private zone tied to the British East India Company that was like the 80% of Canada. Why did that get sold so quickly? It was sold immediately, pennies on the dollar, by these companies to the Canadian government to get British Columbia on board with Confederation, because British Columbia didn't want to. They were an isolated colony. They were choking financially. The gold rush had just created a bunch of bubbles that popped. Nobody had a future. The only economic activity they had was with San Francisco. And so why did the British annexation movement to join the United States fail? Why did Lincoln's policy, which was being expressed by people, his advisors, which involved using Alaska as a springboard to take the Transcontinental Railway, which was finished in 1869, and connect it up the West Coast through British Columbia into Alaska, into the connecting zone for Eurasia, which is supposed to connect down. You can see these maps that I found that I published in my book, showcasing William Gilpin's international land bridge of rail going down to Africa, Asia, with the connecting point being the Bering Strait. So all these things that was the momentum. Why didn't it happen? And so from that standpoint, you can better appreciate what was the real geopolitical reasons for the British North American Act, the sale of Alaska, the creation of Canada as we know it without the mythologies, just honesty, and it helps. For the second part of your question regarding the Malthusian, the X-Club, the restoration of empire in the face of all of this progress, because the empire had weakened itself enormously, right? Go back in time to that period. If you're if you're a Lord Palmerston type of geostrategist, looking at your globally extended system, you've just exerted massive resource allocations towards the Opium Wars, the Second Opium Wars against China. You've exerted massive influence and expenditures in supporting the Confederate South. The British were building warships used by the South to fight Lincoln. That failed. You had already spent a lot of effort in working with France and some corrupt people in the Ottoman Empire to get Russia into the Crimean War, to dismantle Russia and also to dismantle the Ottoman Empire. You put a lot of effort into 2 years of trying to destroy the uprisings in India against the controlled famines that killed millions by Malthusian policy. That was the British policy, was use the gifts God gave us of famine and disease and war to check population. Malthus writes that directly, kill babies unless room can be made for them by deaths of old persons. He's a mathematician, and that's why he's employed by the British East India Company to work at Haileybury College to train, John Stuart Mill, and all of the ideologues who would become the upper level thought controllers of the empire. So, Britain had stretched itself far, and they couldn't stop this momentum for progress, and the nations embracing a multipolar win-win orientation for developing their interests as well as their neighbors, in knowing that we get more out of seeing the world as a non-zero sum system. You can create more wealth if you create peace, not division, right? You encourage creative thought instead of stupidity. You can create more in the long term, which is better for everybody. And that was that truth. It's a fundamental truth. It's scientifically groundable truth of self-interest. It's not just philosophically nice. That was so powerful, and the only way that they could bust it up was, there's on the one hand a certain type of I think of it as a corporate management reshuffling. So when your corporation, if you've got a business, it's not producing revenue anymore, there's mismanagement, you could either declare bankruptcy and just give up, or you could bring in management consultants, evaluate your different departments, reintroduce innovative ideas, and that's what was done with the British Empire. There was a sort of reorganization there's a recognition of a lack of creative adaptability. And you had, as I go through in the last chapter 15, Thomas Huxley was a young, very creative, very misanthropic young man who was discovered, he was talent searched and discovered, and was very quickly, within his 20s, made a leading official within the British Royal Society. And he was given certain privileges. And again, he wasn't born from a rich family. He was born from a poor family. He just saw syphilis patients. He was working in the ghetto slums of London. He was working bad. So he developed this hate. And that hate channeled a lot of creativity. And he was given a responsibility for a project to manage a new set of theories that needed to be cooked up to justify scientifically empire, and to cohere the empire in a more satisfying way, where it could be more unified in its parts. That became the Darwin Project. So Thomas Huxley became an early enforcer and controller of Darwin. Darwin rarely ever debated, he never actually debated his own theories in public. It was always Thomas Huxley, his bulldog, who was always going out, and part of the propaganda machine that was created was his X Club, which was sort of a dining club set up in Cambridge, interfacing with some of the best misanthropic scientific minds representing different fields of anthropology and sociology and even geology, astrophysics, economics, literature. Matthew Arnold was a dining partner in this thing. And they basically created a regular dining club that organized, like an early think tank, a new strategic set of policies. And Nature magazine was created out of this group as well, which I get through as a propaganda instrument. So with this came at least now a new ideological foundation to start creating coherence. But that was still 1865 this was created, the X Club, right? Darwin's project was only published in 1859. There was still lack of means of carrying it out. How do you effectuate now the policies? These are nice thoughts, nice, evil, whatever thoughts, but how do you carry it out? So there were several other think tanks that would do a bit more of the dirty work, one of which was called the Thule Society, and that was set up in 1873. Using a certain retweaking of some of the programs for anarchist mobs of the Young Europe movement of Mazzini and Palmerston that had been useful for the 1830s and 40s and 50s to just create anarchy and destabilize nations in Europe and also some in the United States. But it wasn't coherent enough under a unified ideology. So that the Fabian Society became sort of a socialist, not a real socialist, because it's not a real socialist. These are people who actually, if you look at George Bernard Shaw or the Webbs, or later on H.G. Wells or other members, Bertrand Russell was a member, Julian Huxley was later on a member, the grandson. But a lot of the people who were high-level Fabians themselves were not, you couldn't consider them socialists because they didn't really care about people. They just liked it as a cover to attract good people who were in labor to a cause that would put them in a controlled environment with a priesthood scientifically managing this system from above. So that became one thing that set up the London School of Economics. Lord Balfour was a member, Lord Mackinder was a member, who went on to create geopolitics. He ran the London School of Economics actually for a while, but then also you had the Round Table movement, using some of the money, all of the money, from the funds of Cecil Rhodes, who had destroyed Africa, raping out diamonds and cotton for a long time in Rhodesia. And when he died, his money was used according to his will, and some sponsors, like I think it was William Rothschild was an early one, some other higher level oligarchs, to use that money towards the creation of an array of other types of think tanks called the Round Table movement. that was managed by this guy, Lord Milner, who worked in South Africa too to put down the Boer War with a grouping of young boys like Philip Kerr, who goes on to become Lord Lothian later on, the ambassador to Washington. Or anyway, Lionel Curtis is another big one. But all of these guys are called the Milner Kindergarten, who managed the Round Table movement. They become leaders of the Round Table movement, and another part of the money goes towards the creation of a Rhodes Scholarship Trust system. So Rhodes Scholars are created to be indoctrinated in Oxford and then redeployed back into their part of the world to maintain coherence and advance a bit more of a longer-term agenda. The Round Table movement becomes, it manifests several other forms after World War I, which was, by the way, orchestrated entirely by these groups. World War I was not something that needed to happen. It was an artificial war that could only happen with some serious manipulation of history by these forces and a lot of assassinations and coup d'etats. But they created things like the Council on Foreign Relations. So that became the Round Table movement in the United States in 1921, was created by a bunch of Rhodes Scholars and Fabians. At that time, embedded in the U.S. bureaucracy. They were not controlling things, but they came in high numbers under Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt before that. And the Council on Foreign Relations, we know, they didn't. It's essentially the Chatham House. I mean, the Chatham House movement in London, which was the Royal Society for International Affairs, that was part of the Versailles Treaty Agreements. It was brought online as part of that whole package after World War I, as well as the League of Nations. It was all part of the different aspects of the same world government beast. They couldn't just call themselves Chatham House of America, so they gave themselves Council on Foreign Relations, and we had versions in Canada and in New Zealand and South Africa, and actually a major organization which today runs a lot of anti-Chinese psyops, that's very attractive to a lot of people who are smart, is the China-Africa podcast, which some of your viewers might know of, which was entirely funded by the Round Table movement of South Africa.
Is it China-Africa Project? I think I subscribed.
That's the one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, that sort of sets the tone for a lot of the stuff I go through in Volume 2.
So right there, we're just going to, we have to cut it somewhere. We can't really listen to the entire interview and republish it. I'm attaching it to the podcast. That's how interesting I find it and fascinating. I think that you should take time to listen to it. And we're weeding through all this information all the time and trying to bring to light information that's going to be productive for you, rather than just the run-of-the-mill, typical brainwash, mind slaving corporate media BS that you're going to constantly be dealing with. So we're going to be here to elucidate the true facts of history and get this information out. And you can see that what we're showing here as we're building the case, we're trying to get you to take a closer look at the power of the aristocracy, the power of the imperial monarchy and the imperial courts over society and over banks and over globalism and over the United Nations and over this move towards a one world government and a one world religion. And you can see that individuals like Arthur Balfour, Lord Balfour over here, and individuals like Cecil Rhodes and these other people that we're going to begin to bring out into the light are instrumental in developing this system of Babylonian mystery ritual and the Egyptian sorcery, the practices and the praxis of Egyptian, the Book of the Dead and the Egyptian religio-cultic ceremonies. They love it. They love to worship the moon and the sun and to worship the equinox and the solstice, and they love to lift up Baal and to really ultimately proliferate this Luciferian cult. And that's what we're bringing to light here, is that when you get to the higher levels of these initiations, when you get into the highest levels of the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, when you get up into the knighthood orders, the order of the Garter, you get into these royal societies, you become the Fabians, the controllers, the people who craft these and engineer these secret societies are ultimately practicing the ancient pagan Gnostic traditions that they inherited. They came down from Egypt and from Babylon. And those currents of theosophical, ideological, religio-occultic tradition are not abating. They're not going away. They're generational. They're transferred. Just how you Romanists might get with your children and put them in front of the Christmas tree and have them open Christmas presents each year. You're inculcating a religious system into their lives. And that's what these other individuals, these Luciferians, are doing the same thing. And ultimately, this process of having a Christmas tree, of worshiping, of course, December 25th was always the Babylonian day of Baal, the high occult ceremonial day to worship Baal. And so when you have a Christmas tree in your house on December 25th, you're really participating in this Luciferian system, but you've been deceived into believing that it's Christianity. So that's why it's a process of syncretism, of basically getting you to practice their liturgy and their praxis and their rites and their rituals, but doing it in the name of a different deity. And it's the same thing that Mithraic traditions did through time. As far as the secret cult of Mithras, it ultimately adapted and became the predominant religious system in Rome. Even though it came out of Persia and it came out of Egypt, it ultimately was a system of priesthood and priestcraft that would transform like a chameleon and would shapeshift and would adjust to whatever the parameters of the religious cult was that they were dealing with. And ultimately, that's how the Mithraic traditions came out of the Greek traditions, the Greek mythology, and ultimately became something that dominated Rome, and ultimately would dominate the Roman system of universal religion that we call Catholicism today. Section of our podcast here, and we just want to leave you with, we have, of course, the links in the show notes, but we just want to leave you with a fascinating little clip here of this in-depth lecture that Professor Veith does on the United Nations and the occult background. So let's listen to some of his fascinating exposure here.
Towards the end of his markings overflow with spirituality and mysticism. There you are, the words of the United Nations themselves, or their representatives, telling us how this inspiration came about. Now let's go back a little bit to Foster and Alice Bailey. These were Alice A. Bailey, the one who received dictated messages from Dwal Kul, and who is known as the prophetess of the New Age. They started a group called World Goodwill, an official non-governmental organization within the United Nations. The stated aim of this group is to cooperate in the world of preparation for the reappearance of the Christ. So the United Nations, in other words, is an organization preparing to get all the governments together, yes. But that is just on a political level. The agenda behind it is to bring all the religions together and to prepare it for the coming of Christ. Which Christ? Not Jesus Christ, but the cosmic Christ, because Jesus Christ is not coming, as we will see in a future lecture, to do what they think is going to happen. Their Christ wants to have a kingdom here on earth, but God says, my kingdom is not of this earth. Now, let's have a look at this man, Robert Miller. There he is, Dr. Robert Miller, former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, Chancellor of the United Nations University of Peace, and he's chairperson of the Peace Party 2000. He's a very prominent man. What does he write? Robert Miller. Decide to open yourself to God, to the universe, to all your brethren and sisters, to your inner self, to the potential of the human race, to the infinity of your inner self, and you will become the universe. You will become infinity, and you will at long last you will be at long last your real, divine, stupendous self. There you have the same philosophy. So what is he saying? That we can become gods. All right, so that is the mover and the shaker of the philosophy of the United Nations. Robert Miller writes in World Core Curriculum the following. Now this is stunning. The underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Miller School, now what is the Robert Miller School? We'll have to come to that. Robert Miller School is the education program for the entire world as will be enforced by the United Nations. That's scary. Let's read on. The underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Miller School is based will be found in the teachings set forth in the books of Alice A. Bailey. Hello? The books of Alice A. Bailey were published originally by Lucifer Publishing Company, which, because of all the flack, they changed to Lucis Trust. Isn't that correct? The school is now certified as a United Nations associated school providing education for international cooperation and peace. Okay, there's this big business. So the philosophy is based on Luciferian channeled writings preparing for the coming of Lucifer. And remember what they said. They were quite open about it. Alice A. Bailey claimed evidence of the growth of human intellect along the needed receptive lines for the preparation of the New Age can be seen in the planning of various nations and in the efforts of the United Nations to formulate a world plan. From the very start of this unfoldment, 3 occult factors have governed the development of all these plans. Now, can you see why I call the lecture the UN and the occult agenda? Because Alice A. Bailey says there were 3 occult plans, and Robert Miller says, yes, we follow the writings of Alice A. Bailey. She did not spell them out, but she did state, within the United Nations is a germ and seed of a great international and meditating reflective group, a group of thinking and informed men and women in whose hands lies the destiny of humanity. Ooh. This is largely under the control of many fourth-ray disciples, if you could but realize it, and their point of meditative focus is the intuitional or Buddhic plane, the plane upon which all hierarchical activity is today to be found. That's about as occult as you can get. What she is saying is that the inner core of the United Nations is controlled by people who are under the control of Lucifer. That's what she's saying. She's saying it's demonic. And it's out of her words, not mine. I'm just reading. That's what's such fun about all of this. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy. She was the forerunner, of course, of the Bailey books. And Theosophy was then taken over by Annie Ward Basant over here, and then taken over by Alice A. Bailey. And here is the great invocation that has to be read and learnt by every child in the future. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men, let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. But this Christ is not Jesus Christ. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men. Oh, how neat. It's so derogatory. The purpose which the masters know and serve. What arrogance. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. This is interesting. Which door is to be sealed where evil dwells? Well, if you know occult science, you'll know that they call light darkness and darkness light, and they say that Jesus is the evil one. We read all those quotes when we did the lecture on that issue. May it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Restore what plan? Restore whose plan? And who made it so that it is not restored? Well, who separated the nations? God separated the nations. What is the focus of the United Nations to? Unite the nations. So they want to restore that which the, in inverted commas, evil one happened to mess up with one brilliant move of confusing the languages. Well, this goes to show one word of God and is confused for 4,500 years. Who's really in control here?